At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I watched my 60-year-old neighbor, Karen, deliberately dump 3 buckets of concrete into my grandfather's boat launch while wearing a lime green tracksuit and a smile that could cut glass. The wet cement hit the water with a sickening splash, sending ripples across the mirror-smooth surface of Willowbrook Lake. And that's when I knew this sweet little old lady was about to become my worst nightmare. My name is David Chen, and I inherited my grandfather's lakeside cottage 8 months ago. The house sits on 2 acres of pristine Michigan shoreline, complete with a private boat launch that's been in my family since 1962. Grandpa Joe built that launch with his own hands, rough-hewn cedar logs and fieldstone that's weathered 6 decades of storms without budging an inch. The property came with something even more valuable than waterfront footage, an ironclad easement agreement guaranteeing permanent lake access through a narrow strip of HOA-controlled land. For 60 years, 3 generations of neighbors had honored that agreement without a single complaint. Then Karen Whitmore moved in next door. Picture a woman who looks like she should be baking cookies for her grandchildren, but talks like she's commanding a military operation. Silver hair pulled back in a bun so tight it could stop bullets, pearl earrings that catch the light like tiny surveillance cameras, and a voice that makes everyone within earshot feel like they've disappointed their kindergarten teacher. Karen became HO, a president, 6 weeks after moving and running unopposed because everyone else was too smart to want the job. Her first official act was sending me a certified letter about my non-compliant watercraft storage, referring to my grandfather's vintage 1970 aluminum fishing boat that had sat in the same spot since the Carter administration. I figured it was just new neighbor nervousness. Maybe she didn't understand the property boundaries or the easement agreement. So I walked over with a bottle of wine and a copy of all the legal documents, ready to smooth things over with Midwestern charm. "Hi, Karen. I'm David from next door. I thought we should talk about it." She answered the door wearing yellow rubber gloves and holding a toilet brush like a weapon. "I know exactly who you are, David Chen, and I know you've been trespassing on HOA property for months." The word trespassing hit me like a slap. "I'm sorry? What?" "Your boat. Your dock. That little fire pit area you use for parties. All of it sits on community property, and as HOA president, I have a duty to protect our collective assets from unauthorized use." I held up the folder of documents. "Actually, there's an easement that expired." Karen's smile could have frozen the lake solid. "I had my attorney review every document in the HOA files. Your grandfather's little handshake deal ran out in 1999, and nobody bothered to renew it." The world tilted sideways. "That's impossible. We've been using this access for 24 years of illegal occupation." She stepped back and started to close the door. "You have 30 days to remove all personal property from community land, or I'll have it removed for you." The door slammed with a sound like a coffin lid closing. That night, I spread every piece of family paperwork across my kitchen table: deeds, surveys, insurance policies, tax records dating back to Eisenhower. The easement agreement was crystal clear: perpetual access to Willowbrook Lake via the established waterfront corridor, running in perpetuity with the land. Karen was lying. But what I didn't know yet was exactly how far she was willing to go to steal my birthright. 3 days later, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. Through my bedroom window, I could see a crew of workers assembling what looked like the Great Wall of China along the property line. Karen stood in her bathrobe, directing traffic, pointing at my dock like she was ordering an execution. By noon, they'd installed 40 feet of 8-foot privacy fencing, complete with razor wire along the top and no trespassing signs every 6 feet. My boat launch was now on the wrong side of Fort Karen. I called the county assessor's office, the HOA management company, and 2 different real estate attorneys. The news wasn't good. Karen's lawyer was Richard Blackstone, a man who'd built his career on turning property disputes into blood sports. He'd already filed preliminary paperwork claiming the easement had indeed expired through abandonment and non-renewal. But the real gut punch came that evening when I found Karen standing in my grandfather's boat, taking photographs with a professional camera. "Evening, David." She waved cheerfully from the driver's seat of a boat that had belonged to my family longer than she'd been alive. "Just documenting the condition of this abandoned watercraft before disposal. Get out of my boat. Technically, it's an abandoned vessel on community property. As HOA president, I'm required to catalog it for removal." She snapped another photo. Such a shame when people don't take care of their responsibilities. My hands were shaking with rage. That boat has been registered and insured continuously since 1970. Here's the paperwork. I held up the documents I'd brought as evidence. Karen studied them with theatrical concentration. "Interesting, but registration doesn't establish ownership of the mooring location. This dock, this boat launch, even the water underneath it all belongs to the Willowbrook Estates community. The easement is void." My attorney was very clear about that. She stepped out of the boat with exaggerated care, as if she was doing me a favor. "But I'm not unreasonable, David. If you'd like to discuss purchasing lake access rights from the HOA, I'm sure we could work something out." "How much?" Her smile was pure predator. "Well, waterfront access is quite valuable these days. I'd estimate fair market value at around $200,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000 for rights my family had owned since before Karen was born. Of course, she continued, there would be annual maintenance fees, usage restrictions, approval processes for any modifications. She let the words hang in the air like smoke from a house fire. "You're insane." "I'm practical. Your grandfather may have been satisfied with informal arrangements, but this is the 21st century. Everything needs to be properly documented, regulated, and monetized for the good of the community." That's when I noticed the surveyor's stakes she'd planted around my entire waterfront area, each one marked with official-looking tags. But what Karen said next made me realize she wasn't just stealing my lake access, she was planning to steal everything. "Actually, David, there's one more tiny issue we need to discuss." Karen's voice carried that particular sweetness that means you're about to get stabbed in the back. "It seems your property line isn't quite where you think it is." She handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was a professional survey report that made my stomach drop through the earth's core. According to Blackstone and Associates Land Surveying, my property line was 40 feet further inland than every document in my possession indicated. My boat launch wasn't just built on HOA land, my entire lakefront was supposedly community property. "This is ridiculous. I have the original deed from 1962. Old surveys can be inaccurate. Modern GPS technology reveals the truth." Karen's voice dripped false sympathy. "I know it's disappointing, but we can't let sentimental attachment override legal reality." The survey was signed by Robert Blackstone, Richard's brother, apparently. The whole family was in the property theft business. "You're claiming my family has been trespassing for 60 years? "Not trespassing. Squatting." Karen examined her manicured nails. "But again, I'm not unreasonable. The HOA would be willing to consider a long-term lease arrangement. Very reasonable terms, only $4,000 a month for continued waterfront access. $4,000 a month. $48,000 a year. For land my grandfather had paid for with money earned building bridges for the State Highway Department. And if I refuse? Then I'm afraid we'll need to take steps to protect community assets, starting with removing that unsafe dock structure." She gestured toward my grandfather's boat launch like it was a public health hazard. Our insurance company has expressed concerns about liability issues. That evening, I called my cousin Marcus in Chicago. Marcus is a civil engineer who specializes in land surveying, and when I read him the Blackstone survey report, his laughter could have been heard from space. David, that survey is complete bullshit. I helped Grandpa Joe verify those property lines myself in 1995 when he refinanced the house. We used GPS equipment that was more accurate than most of what's available today. Can you prove it? Can I prove the sun rises in the east? Give me 3 days to drive up there with my equipment. We're going to nail these bastards to the wall. But Karen wasn't waiting for proof. The next morning, I woke up to find her installing motion-activated security cameras pointed directly at my dock, my boat, and my back door. Just keeping an eye on community property, she explained when I confronted her. Can't be too careful about theft these days. The cameras weren't just surveillance, they were intimidation. Every time I walked to my own dock, red recording lights blinked at me like angry eyes. Karen had turned my waterfront into a prison yard with herself as the warden. That afternoon, she escalated again. I came home from work to find an orange notice taped to my back door. CONDEMNATIONPRO CEEEEENGUNSAEFESTRUCTURE. The county had apparently received multiple complaints about my deteriorating dock and scheduled an inspection for the following week. I knew without asking who had filed those complaints. But Karen's masterstroke came that evening when I found her hosting a neighborhood barbecue on what she was now calling the community waterfront area, using my grandfather's picnic table and my family's fire pit to entertain the very neighbors who should have been defending my rights. David, she waved me over with the enthusiasm of a game show host. Come meet some of your neighbors. Everyone's so excited about the new community amenities. Mrs. Peterson from down the street was roasting marshmallows over my grandfather's fire pit. Karen tells us the HOA is turning this whole area into a community park. Isn't that wonderful? I looked around at my neighbors' people I'd known for years enjoying what they thought was a generous gift from their new HOA president. Karen had poisoned the well so thoroughly that my own community was celebrating the theft of my birthright. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just trying to steal my property. She was trying to make me the villain of my own story. Marcus arrived on Thursday with a truck full of surveying equipment and a determination that reminded me why our grandfather had always said the Chen family didn't back down from bullies. Within 6 hours, he'd resurveyed the entire waterfront and confirmed what we already knew. Karen's survey was off by exactly 40 feet. It's not even a good fake, Marcus said, showing me the GPS readings. Look at this. They moved the benchmark reference point. That's not a mistake, David. That's fraud. We spent Friday documenting everything: photographs, measurements, soil samples, even core samples from the dock posts to prove they'd been in place for decades. By Saturday morning, we had enough evidence to prove Karen's survey was fabricated. But when we tried to file a complaint with the county, we discovered Karen had been busy too. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but there's already an active case involving this property, the clerk explained. Mrs. Whitmore filed a formal complaint alleging survey fraud and property encroachment. Until that's resolved, we can't accept any conflicting documentation. Karen had beaten us to the courthouse, filing her fake survey as evidence and claiming we were the ones committing fraud. The system was designed to protect property owners from false claims, but Karen had turned it into a weapon by filing first. We walked out of the county building, feeling like we'd been sucker punched by bureaucracy itself. She's good, Marcus admitted grudgingly. Evil, but good. That afternoon, things got personal. I found Karen in my backyard, measuring my deck with a tape measure while a man in a suit took notes. Afternoon, David. This is Bill Hendricks, from the county zoning department. We're just documenting some potential setback violations. Bill looked embarrassed but determined. Sir, I've received complaints that your deck may extend beyond allowable limits for waterfront structures. I need to measure everything for my report. Karen stood behind him, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk watching a mouse. She'd found another angle of attack, claiming my deck violated zoning regulations that had never been enforced in the 60 years since it was built. When was this deck constructed? Bill asked. 1967, I replied. Do you have the original permits? My grandfather had built the deck himself, back when permits were suggestions rather than requirements. It was built to code for the time period. Current code requires structures to be at least 15 feet from the property line. Bill measured the distance to Karen's fence. This appears to be only 8 feet. That's because she moved the property line, I said, pointing at Karen. That fence is built on my land. Karen's voice was pure innocence. The fence is built according to the official survey on file with the county. If there's a discrepancy, Mr. Chen is welcome to have his own survey done through proper channels, of course. The trap was perfect. To prove the deck was legal, I'd have to prove my property lines were correct. But to prove my property lines were correct, I'd have to overcome Karen's fraudulent survey. And the county wouldn't consider our evidence until Karen's complaint was resolved, which could take months. Bill finished his measurements and handed me a citation. Sir, you have 30 days to either remove the non-compliant portions of the deck or apply for a variance. If you choose the variance route, there'll be a public hearing where neighbors can voice their concerns. A public hearing where Karen, as HOA president, would stand up and tell my neighbors that I was a scofflaw who built illegal structures on stolen land. The variance application fee is $800, Bill added apologetically. And there's no guarantee of approval. After he left, Karen lingered in my backyard, admiring her handiwork. You know, David, this all seems so unnecessarily complicated. If you'd just accepted my original offer, none of this would have been necessary. What do you really want, Karen? For the first time since I'd met her, her mask slipped. The sweet grandmother routine disappeared, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. I want lakefront property. I want what your grandfather got for pennies on the dollar 60 years ago. And I want you to understand that I always get what I want. Why? You already have a nice house, a good life. Because I can. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. Because people like your grandfather got rich off deals that people like me never had access to. Because it's my turn. She walked away, leaving me standing in my own backyard feeling like a stranger in my own life. But what Karen didn't know was that Marcus had been recording our entire conversation from inside my house, and what she just admitted to was about to become the key to bringing down her entire scheme. Marcus and I spent Sunday plotting our counterattack. The recorded confession was good, but we needed something bigger, something that would expose Karen's fraud so clearly that even her pet county officials couldn't ignore it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, my grandfather's old tackle box. I'd been going through his fishing gear, partly for nostalgia, and partly because I might not have access to the lake much longer, when I found something that made my heart race. Tucked behind a tray of rusty lures was a small metal cylinder about the size of a film canister. Inside were the original surveyor's pins from 1962. Holy shit, Marcus breathed when I showed him. David, these are the actual boundary markers from when Grandpa Joe bought the property. If we can find where they were planted. We spent Monday morning with metal detectors, following the faded property description from my grandfather's deed. The pins were still there, buried under 6 decades of leaves and soil, exactly where the original surveyor had placed them. When we plotted their positions using GPS coordinates, the result was devastating. Karen's fence was built 12 feet onto my property, and her fraudulent survey had moved my property line by exactly 40 feet. She didn't just fake the survey, Marcus said, staring at his measurements. She completely fabricated it. This isn't incompetence, this is criminal fraud. But proving fraud and stopping Karen were two different things. She still had possession of my waterfront. She still had her political connections at the county, and she still had a legal system that moved like molasses in January. What we needed was a way to force her hand, to make her reveal the truth in front of witnesses who couldn't be bought or intimidated. That's when I remembered something my grandfather used to say. Sometimes the best way to catch a thief is to let them think they've already won. Tuesday morning, I called Karen and asked for a meeting. I want to discuss your offer, I told her. The lease arrangement for waterfront access. Her voice practically purred with satisfaction. I'm so glad you're being reasonable, David. This will be much better for everyone. We met at her kitchen table Wednesday afternoon. Karen had prepared a stack of legal documents, all perfectly typed and formatted, as if she'd been planning this moment for months. $4,000 a month, she began, with a 5-year initial term and automatic renewal clauses. The HOA retains all development rights, and you'll be responsible for maintenance and insurance on any structures. I pretended to read through the contract while Marcus waited outside with recording equipment. The lease was everything Karen had threatened, and worse, it would have turned me into a tenant on my own land while giving her legal ownership of everything my family had built. There's just one thing, I said. I need to be sure about the property boundaries. Would it be possible to have another survey done? At my expense, of course. Karen's eyes sharpened, but her voice stayed sweet. Oh, that won't be necessary. The Blackstone survey is very thorough. I'm sure it is. But my insurance company is being picky about coverage for structures on leased land. They want their own verification. David, the survey is already on file with the county. Getting another one would just be redundant and expensive. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out why I'd want a new survey if I was planning to sign her lease. Actually, you know what? You're right. If the county accepts the Blackstone survey, that should be good enough for my insurance company. Karen relaxed, but I wasn't done. Although, just out of curiosity, how did you know the property lines were wrong? I mean, my family used that waterfront for 60 years without anyone complaining. Modern surveying techniques are much more accurate than they used to be. Her voice was carefully neutral. Right, but what made you think to check? I mean, you're new to the neighborhood. How did you even know there might be a boundary issue? Karen's smile flickered. Well, as HOA president, I felt it was important to verify all our property boundaries. Due diligence, you understand? So you surveyed every property in the neighborhood? The important ones? The ones adjacent to community property. Just mine? A long pause. Karen's mask was slipping again, revealing the calculation underneath. David, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything. I'm just curious about the timing. You moved in, became HOA president, immediately challenged my easement, and then discovered a boundary error that just happened to give you control over lakefront property. That's quite a coincidence. Karen stood up abruptly. I think this meeting is over. If you want to sign the lease agreement, you know where to find me. Otherwise, enjoy your county hearing next week. She walked me to the door with the efficiency of someone ejecting a problem, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She knew I was onto something, but she couldn't figure out what. As I walked back to my house, I saw her through the kitchen window, talking rapidly on her phone. She was calling someone, probably her lawyer or her surveyor brother, and she was gesturing frantically. That's when I knew we had her exactly where we wanted her. Thursday morning, Karen made her fatal mistake. I was having coffee on my deck when I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy digging equipment. Through the trees, I could see Karen directing a crew of workers who were excavating something near the property line. Marcus joined me with binoculars. What the hell is she doing? She's planting evidence. I adjusted the focus to get a better view. Look at what they're digging up. The workers were pulling old metal stakes out of the ground surveyor's pins that looked suspiciously new despite being covered with artificially aged dirt. Karen was installing fake boundary markers to support her fraudulent survey. She's destroying evidence of the real property line and replacing it with fake markers, Marcus said. This is felony evidence tampering. I called the county sheriff's office and reported a crime in progress. 20 minutes later, Deputy Sarah Williams arrived in a cruiser, followed by a county surveyor named Tom Bradley, who specialized in property fraud cases. "Ma'am, we need you to stop all excavation immediately," Deputy Williams told Karen. "We've received reports of potential evidence tampering." Karen's performance was Oscar-worthy. Evidence tampering? I'm simply having some landscaping done near the property line. Surely that's not illegal? It is if you're altering or destroying surveyor's markers, Tom Bradley said, examining the freshly dug holes. These appear to be boundary pins. Do you have permits for this work? Well, they're not really boundary pins. They're just old metal stakes left by previous owners. Bradley knelt down and examined one of the old stakes Karen's crew had been installing. "Ma'am, this is a professional surveyor's pin with GPS coordinates engraved on it. The serial number indicates it was manufactured in 2023. The look on Karen's face was worth every moment of the hell she'd put me through. Furthermore, Bradley continued, pulling out a metal detector, I'm detecting several other metal objects in the area that haven't been excavated. With your permission, I'd like to investigate." Karen couldn't refuse without looking guilty. Within 30 minutes, Bradley had located the original 1,962 surveyor's pins, the ones Marcus and I had found earlier but hadn't disturbed. These pins established the original property boundary, Bradley announced, taking GPS readings. Based on their position, I can confirm that the fence installed by the HOA is located approximately 12 feet onto Mr. Chen's private property. Karen's world was crumbling in real time. That's impossible. The Blackstone survey clearly showed. The Blackstone survey appears to contain significant errors, Deputy Williams said carefully. "Mr. Chen, do you want to press charges for trespassing and property encroachment?" Before I could answer, Karen played her final card. "This is all a misunderstanding. David and I had an agreement, a verbal contract, allowing him to use HOA property in exchange for certain considerations. If there's been any confusion about boundaries, it's because we were working out an informal arrangement." The lie was so smooth, so confident, that for a moment I wondered if anyone would believe the truth. But Marcus had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Actually," he said, pulling out his phone, "I have a recording of Mrs. Whitmore from yesterday explaining her real motivations." He played Karen's confession, "I want lakefront property. I want what your grandfather got for pennies on the dollar 60 years ago. Because people like your grandfather got rich off deals that people like me never had access to. Because it's my turn." The silence that followed was beautiful. Deputy Williams looked at Karen with the expression of someone who just watched a train wreck in slow motion. "Ma'am, based on this evidence, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, evidence tampering, and criminal trespass." As they led Karen away in handcuffs, she looked back at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over, David. I'll fight this in court. I'll appeal everything. I'll make your life hell until—" "Ma'am," Deputy Williams interrupted gently, "you have the right to remain silent. I'd suggest using it." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of machinery again, but this time it was a crew removing Karen's illegal fence. By afternoon, I had clear access to my grandfather's boat launch for the first time in weeks. But the real victory came 3 days later when Karen's husband Dave showed up at my door with a legal document. "She wants to settle," he said quietly. "Full restitution, legal fees, and a formal apology. In exchange, you drop the criminal charges. What about the civil suit for property damage and emotional distress?" Dave looked older than his years. "Whatever you think is fair. She just wants this to end before it gets worse." Karen had lost everything: her reputation, her HOA presidency, her legal fees, and her dream of stealing lakefront property. But what she'd really lost was the thing bullies value most: the power to intimidate other people. The settlement was generous enough to renovate my grandfather's dock and install a new boat lift. But the most satisfying part was Karen's written apology, which had to be published in the HOA newsletter and posted on the community bulletin board. 6 months later, Karen and Dave moved to a condo in Florida, about as far from Willowbrook Lake as they could get while staying in the same country. The new neighbors who bought their house are a young couple with twin toddlers who love feeding ducks from my grandfather's dock. I kept one of Karen's fake surveyor pins as a reminder that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who smile while they stab you in the back. It sits on my mantelpiece next to a photo of my grandfather, a man who believed that a handshake and a man's word were worth more than any legal document. He was wrong about the legal documents, but he was right about everything else. Sometimes I sit on that old dock at sunset, watching the light dance on the water my family has called home for 6 decades, and I think about Karen's last words before they led her away. She said this wasn't over, that she'd make my life hell. But here's the thing about bullies: once you prove you won't back down, they usually find easier targets. Karen learned the hard way that some people's roots run deeper than her schemes, and some fights aren't worth picking. The lake is still there, the dock is still solid, and the Chen family is still standing. Some things are worth fighting for, even if it means building a few bridges and burning a few more.